got spring fever.
This is an ABC News special report. Crisis in Ukraine.
And good morning to all of you. For those of you just joining us, I'm Josh Elliott. President Obama is about to make a statement on the volatile situation in Ukraine as pro-Russian crowds have now seized 2 Ukrainian warships this morning, and Ukraine says its troops were being threatened. A senior administration official has told ABC News that the president today will announce a set of tough new sanctions against Russia, all linked to Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said this morning that Russia is suspended from the G8 until Moscow changes its tack on Ukraine, while French President Francois Hollande has said the upcoming EU and Russian summit scheduled in June has now been canceled because of the crisis. Before the president steps to the microphone, I do want to bring in our senior White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl. And again, Jonathan, on Monday, he announced his first set of sanctions, spoke to the possibility of additional sanctions being levied. What then do we expect the president to discuss today?
Well, Josh, I am told this is the second round of sanctions, and this one could be more significant. What he's doing here is sanctioning what White House officials have called Putin's cronies. This is some of the billionaire businessmen, the so-called oligarchs in Russia close to Putin. They will see their assets in the United States frozen, some of them anyway, with this move. And this is a 1-2 punch. As the president is coming out now, European leaders are meeting, imposing their own second round of sanctions. And again, this is all designed to try to put pressure on Putin, make him pay a price for taking away Crimea. The big question, of course, Josh, is whether or not this would actually get Putin to withdraw. Virtually nobody believes there's any chance that this will force Putin to back down. The hope is that it will make him think twice before going any further into Ukraine.
And yet, Jonathan, it does seem, though, that the administration is looking for different paths to diplomacy here. Secretary of State John Kerry just announcing today that he plans to meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov sometime in the next week. This was a formerly unplanned and unannounced meeting. So do we see, even as these sanctions are levied, do we see perhaps the White House looking for ways out?
They are looking for every possible way out. And also, the president in a local interview yesterday absolutely ruled out any military action regarding this crisis. So it is all about trying to find a diplomatic solution, a face-saving way for Russia to get out of this, even as officials will privately acknowledge to you that there's no way to get Putin, at least in the short term, to withdraw from Crimea. And here we have the president coming to the microphones, making the statement right before he goes on a trip to Florida.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to provide an update on the situation in Ukraine and the steps that the United States is taking in response. Over the last several days, we've continued to be deeply concerned by events in Ukraine. We've seen an illegal referendum in Crimea, an illegitimate move by the Russians to annex Crimea, and dangerous risks of escalation, including threats to Ukrainian personnel in Crimea and threats to southern and eastern Ukraine as well. These are all choices that the Russian government has made, choices that have been rejected by the international community as well as the government of Ukraine. And because of these choices, the United States is today moving, as we said we would, to impose additional costs on Russia. Based on the executive order that I signed in response to Russia's initial intervention in Ukraine, we're imposing sanctions on more senior officials of the Russian government. In addition, we are today sanctioning a number of other individuals with substantial resources and influence who provide material support to the Russian leadership, as well as a bank that provides material support to these individuals. Now, we're taking these steps as part of our response to what Russia has already done in Crimea. At the same time, the world is watching with grave concern as Russia has positioned its military in a way that could lead to further incursions into southern and eastern Ukraine. For this reason, we've been working closely with our European partners to develop more severe actions that could be taken if Russia continues to escalate the situation. As part of that process, I signed a new executive order today that gives us the authority to impose sanctions not just on individuals but on key sectors of the Russian economy. This is not our preferred outcome. these sanctions would not only have a significant impact on the Russian economy, but could also be disruptive to the global economy. However, Russia must know that further escalation will only isolate it further from the international community. The basic principles that govern relations between nations in Europe and around the world must be upheld in the 21st century. And that includes respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. The notion that nations do not simply redraw borders or make decisions at the expense of their neighbors simply because they are larger or more powerful. One of our other top priorities continues to be providing assistance to the government of Ukraine so it can stabilize its economy and meet the basic needs of the Ukrainian people. As I travel to Europe next week to meet with the G7 and other European and Asian allies, I once again urge Congress to pass legislation that is necessary to provide this assistance, and do it right away. Expressions of support are not enough. We need action. I also hope that the IMF moves swiftly to provide a significant package of support for Ukrainians as they pursue reforms. In Europe, I'll also be reinforcing a message that Vice President Biden carried to Poland and the Baltic states this week. America's support for our NATO allies is unwavering. We're bound together by our profound Article 5 commitment to defend one another and by a set of shared values that so many generations sacrificed for. We've already increased our support for our Eastern European allies, and we will continue to strengthen NATO's collective defense, and we will step up our cooperation with Europe on economic and energy issues as well. Now, let me close by making a final point. Diplomacy between the United States and Russia continues. We've emphasized that Russia still has a different path available, one that de-escalates the situation and one that involves Russia pursuing a diplomatic solution with the government in Kiev, with the support of the international community. The Russian people need to know, and Mr. Putin needs to understand, that the Ukrainians shouldn't have to choose between the West and Russia. We want the Ukrainian people to determine their own destiny and to have good relations with the United States, with Russia, with Europe, with anyone that they choose. That can only happen if Russia also recognizes the rights of all the Ukrainian people to determine their future as free individuals and as a sovereign nation. Rights that people and nations around the world understand and support. Thank you very much, everybody.
Do you think Mr. Putin cares?
Thank you.
Do they have signs on other parts of Ukraine?
Again, President Obama announcing a new and expanded set of sanctions targeting Russian senior officials with ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as a bank that provides material support to said individuals. He also spoke to the sectors of the Russian economy that could perhaps also fall under the aegis of these sanctions. I do want to bring in now ABC's Martha Raddatz in Washington, D.C. And Martha, these new set of sanctions were to a degree forecast even on Monday when the president announced his first set of sanctions. I asked you then what they presumed the effectiveness would be. You thought that we would see this day. This day has now come just 5 days later. So how effective can we expect this new set of sanctions to be?
Well, as you remember, Josh, talking earlier in the week, those sanctions didn't seem to bite at all. In fact, the Russians basically laughed them off, brushed them off. These clearly are tougher, aiming, the president said, not only at key individuals who are close to Putin, but also the bank and also key sectors of the economy. The one thing I would worry about here, because the administration has made it very clear they will keep increasing sanctions if Putin doesn't make a move back, and certainly not go into eastern Ukraine. I worry that Putin will see how far he can go. What is the next step? What will they do next? How far can I go? Because he has shown no sign whatsoever of stepping back.
We should make note that the president's announcement of these sanctions does fall in line now with other European Union leaders who also announced their own set of expanded sanctions as well, and perhaps dialing down the rhetoric that has marked this throughout. The president did say in closing, and I do quote, "Russia still has a different path available. For Martha Raddatz in Washington and Jonathan Karl here in New York, I'm Josh Elliott. We now return you to regular programming in some parts of the country. That is Good Morning America, and there will be a complete wrap-up tonight on World News with Diane Sawyer. And of course, you can always get the latest anytime at abcnews.com. Have a good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
We'll join our programming after these messages.